The UK is returning the Chagos Islands to Mauritius after a protracted legal dispute, bringing down the curtains on one of Britain's last colonial territories. Made up of 58 small islands, the Chagos archipelago is located in the Indian Ocean between East Africa and South Asia. Its largest island, Diego Garcia, hosts a joint UK-US military base after the United Kingdom government forcibly removed the entire Chagossian population from their homeland. As part of the agreement to return the islands, the military base will continue to operate for the next 99 years. This week on the program, we explore the Chagossian story and the painful experiences of those exiled, as well as the legal and administrative challenges surrounding the return of the islands. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. I'm now joined by Olivier Bancoul, a leader and chair of the Chagos refugee group, to hear their personal story of displacement and resilience. Olivier, thank you for joining us. First off, how do you feel? Because this dispute has lasted over 50 years, but it's now coming to an end. How does that make you feel?
Oh, we feel very happy. It's a very historical agreement for a country who had been denying our fundamental rights and our dignity for many years. Instead of not having something, because as you know, our aim is to be able to recognize our fundamental rights as all human beings. And in this agreement, it's something that had been done that not 100% satisfaction, but we can say more than 75% are very acceptable, mainly concerning our right to return on and settle on Paros, Banos, and Solomon, and of course about reparation for all that we have been suffered for many years.
So for the benefit of our audience, talk to us about this right to return. Briefly tell us who the Chagossian people are.
Chagossian community was living for more than 5 generations in Chagos. Most of them came from slavery in a country like Mozambique, Madagascar, and most of them come also from Mauritius, where we have a company who is work in copra industries. They employ people to come there and to work. People had been living there for more than 5 generations. And life was wonderful. Everyone have his own house, everyone have a job, and we have our culture, we have our tradition, and suddenly, in 1965, the British government decided to find a place to build a U.S. military base because they just want to have a detection on polarized missile, and this is how our nightmare started. But let me tell you, when we talk about Chagos, it consists of about 65 islands, where most of the island was inhabited. We have the main island was Diego Garcia, where we have a U.S. military base. We have Paros Banos, where I was born, and we have Bodam Salomon. As I said to you, it's a sense of living in peace and harmony, because life was so easy for us. After working hours, because we are surrounded by the sea, everyone will go to fish, and it's a way of like living like one family. It's not only to go fishing to have for your own, but it's a way of sharing with each other. It's how life was in Chagos. But unfortunately, with the coming of the United States military base, nightmare started on Diego Garcia. First of all, they asked people that they have to leave Diego Garcia in order to make a military base. At the first time, it was only parts of it will be used, but finally they just approved everyone from Diego Garcia to go to either to Paros, Banos, or Solomon.
Yeah, so I just wanted to come back to that, Olivier, because you're talking about the military base, the U.S. military base being one of the reasons that the Chagossians were uprooted. Is that the only reason, or what else was given as an excuse for, uprooting the people from the 60 islands you mentioned?
Yeah, first of all, they denying the fundamental rights of people. According to them, they think that Chagossians don't know about their rights, and they are taking decision without informing us, and all decisions have been taken on our head, and this is why we don't know what is happening. You see, and only when they gathered people on Chagossian and asked them that they have to leave Chagossian because it will be dangerous for them to live, to continue to live, because it will be a place where we have a huge U.S. military base outside the United States, and how we had been shocked. And the way of deportation was one of the most shameful that happened to Chagossian, because it's a shameful for UK government, because the way of removal of Chagossian was very unfair, because we have never expect to have this kind of treatment, because we have, as I said, we have our house, we have our job, we have our family, we have our culture, we have our tradition. Suddenly, what they say always, they want to promote culture. But what about our culture? It seems that they want to destroy our culture.
Talk to us about that removal a little bit, because I want to find out what your journey has been like for you and the Chagos people.
First of all, they started by killing dogs, gas dog, because according to them, our own domestic dog, they consider it like a straw dog. It's not the case. They use many poison to kill our dogs. And finally, what they did, they put all our dogs in a room, and they used 2 Land Rovers with their pollution and just gas them. And they just have a common hole, and buried all the dogs. What happened to our dogs? And everyone was seeking, maybe the American asking us to bring our dog to have a vaccination. But unfortunately, it's not the case. Our dog have been killed. And one day after, they asked people that they have to leave Chagossian because it will be not safe for them to continue to live on Chagossian. And since what happened is that people have to choose either to go on Paris, Banos, or Solomon,
right, or
to go to Mauritius or Seychelles. And this is what we have been forced to leave. Even those who choose to go on Paris, Banos, and Solomon, 1 year later, the same story happened as it was in Chagossian.
I want to hear a little bit more about all the Chagossians scattered all over in the diaspora, because that British occupation left you scattered all over the world, essentially in exile. How do you feel now? How do the Chagossian people feel now? What are they saying?
UK government said every time that they have a very deep regret for what happened to Chagossian. They never come with a solution to put an end to our suffering. Now, with historic agreement, it's a sense that they come with. Let me tell you that before, they tried to just compensate Chagossian, to say that, I will put a support package to improve your condition of living. But unfortunately, nothing had been done, And the way that bringing the UK government in the United Nations General Assembly, and then the matter had been referred to the International Court of Justice, it's something that to put them in front of their responsibility. They need to fulfill their responsibility, because everywhere they say that they are champion of human rights, but what they did to Chagossian, everyone should know, because they banished our fundamental rights. And this is why we continue. I myself, I challenging the UK government for what they did in 1965 up to 73. Because when you look at the British Ordinance 1971, who say that everyone don't have the right to go there except UK and US soldiers, even those who were born. It's a violation of my fundamental rights. It's a violation of the Charter of United Nations because you cannot dismantle a territory before it's independent. What they did with Mauritius. And the way they did with us is the most shameful way. And we see, this is why we say it's a crime against humanity.
What does going back to the islands and resettling there entail for the Chagossians? What do you hope for yourself? What are you going to find when you return back to the island?
You know, first of all, the way I came to Mauritius is because my sister had been hurt by a will card in 1968. I was only 4 years old. And the way that we have to come to Mauritius, the reason we have to come to Mauritius is because to have treatment for my sister, because in Peros Banos, we don't have inadequate medication. When we came to Mauritius in 1968, and fortunately, 3 months after, my sister passed away. When my mom and dad decided to return, to register their name to return, it was a shock that we learned that it will be impossible for us to return because the island had been given to America to build a US military base. And the last group arrived in Mauritius in 1973. Let me tell you, among those who came on the last group was a baby of 3 months, who is now 51 years old. It is a way. They say that don't worry, when you come to Mauritius, where majority choose to go, you will have the same life as you are supposed to have in Chagos. But unfortunately, nothing had been done, had been prepared, nothing had been planned. And people had been just trapped on the slum, in the slum of poverty without consideration. And it was very difficult for Chagossians to adapt themselves in the Mauritian society. The time that we had been objecting to go to our birthplace, we have other people living there. We have Filipino, we have Singaporean, we have Sri Lanka, we have British, we have American living there where we as native, we don't have the rights. And this is why we say that we can't accept that and we will not give up. We continue to argue that it is unacceptable, right, the way of doing this.
So how is it that other nationalities have the right to live on the Chagos Island, but Chagossians do not have that right?
For me, it's a discrimination, not only for me, for everyone. How could you say that? We do accept that we have a base in Chagossian. If there is cohabitation among those foreigners, we are not against those people. But we think that priority should be given to the Chagossian people all over the world where we have a US military base. We have the cohabitation of foreigners. And we can't understand. Just taking one example. The most secret base for US in Cuba, even then in Guantanamo, we have cohabitation of local people. It's the only place where we have a US military base where we don't have local people. Taking the case of Okinawa, taking the case of Honolulu, taking the place of everywhere where we have a US military base. We have the cohabitation of it. And we can't understand.
So I want to look ahead as we wind down here. Looking ahead, what does the future hold for Chagossians and the Chagos Islands?
We say we have the right to go on visit to Chagos. We don't have the right to stay, to resettle there. What we want to see, as I said before, if there is place for other people, it should have place for us. We think that this have to correct, and we will continue to allow those people who were born on Chagos to have the same treatment as people in Peros, Banos, and Salvador. We will continue, and at the same time, we want that reparation be done. Because up to now, we have less than 500 natives still alive. Most of them passed away. It's time for the UK government, with the collaboration of the US government, make reparation to all the native Chagossians, even those who pass away, where their family, the heirs, can benefit of all that. And of course, there is a lease will pay to Mauritius concerning the base of Chagossian. I see that a life pension need to be given to all Chagossian natives.
Indeed, Olivier Bancold, thank you very much for joining us. Well, on that note, let's take a short break, and when we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to discuss British Empire methods of acquisition of territories in Africa and the broader implications of the historic transfer of the Chagos Islands back to its rightful owners. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's now bring in our panel of experts, both joining us via Zoom. From Johannesburg, Dr. Kandala Lupuana, international law expert, and joining us in Berlin, Dr. Anna Akosua, lecturer in international law. Thank you both for joining us on the program. Dr. Akosua, let me start off with you, because the UK has agreed to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, ending years of a legal dispute. As an international law expert, what in your understanding forms the basis of such disputes or those claims in court?
So the claim has always been made since the separation of the Chagos Islands from Mauritius. After Mauritius gained independence, it has been litigated in international courts, such as the International Court of Justice. And the question was really, did decolonization fully take place? Did sovereignty cease to exist for Mauritius, and did the UK lawfully administer the islands? And it was ruled on the negative, so to speak, that the occupation was not in conformity with international law. But international law is very limited in implementation of judgments, and the decision was merely an advisory opinion, which meant that diplomatic and political channels needed to reach this agreement in the end of the day.
Dr. Akosua, I want to expand on that issue of sovereignty for a little bit, because the Chagos Islands are some of the last colonies to be returned by Britain in Africa. Are there other examples of territorial disputes or claims involving Britain you're familiar with, and what have been the issues there?
So, of course, sovereignty is a concept that shaped international law and that was perverted to a degree. It is a concept that was denied African countries by denying sovereignty to African territories and to its peoples. Administrations, colonial administrations were established, and we have the Berlin Conference that where a scramble for Africa took place, and it was divided and allegedly, because it was not land occupied by anyone. However, history has shown us that there was always contracts and treaties being made with African indigenous populations. So even Europeans believed that they were subjects of international law or of some law, but it was then later denied. And African people were conceptualized as non-humans and thereby deprived of all their rights and humanity. And I think that part to restore is where international law has its limits, because it doesn't really favor the powerless states. We see it in certain structures in the General Assembly. The General Assembly is very vocal with regards to concerns of countries, developing countries. However, they lack the power to really enforce decisions. And we had disputes in Africa going on. We see the same with regards to Germany versus, or German recognition of the genocide in Namibia and the talks for reparations, which now also has backing by the African Union, by many African states on decolonization, which also encompasses some kind of repair. And there we also have this issue of an agreement, but does it really take into account the indigenous people that were really harmed, local populations that claim they were talked over or not talked with? And so I think that is a similar issue that we can also see with the Chagonians, that where some claim they have not been heard.
Right. So, Dr. Lupuana, let's look at that, the rights of the indigenous populations, as Dr. Akosua has mentioned there, because once the ICJ resolves a dispute over territory, like, yeah, you know, in the Chagossian situation, where the indigenous people were actually forcibly removed, such like in the manner the British did to the Chagossians, what should follow immediately and what should follow in the long term?
It is not only having a deal, yes, that is the beginning of something, that we salute that kind of negotiation. But what is required and what most of the African countries fought for is a total liberation of the territory. So territory integrity. There must be a genuine independence where people are freely or will be freely to determine their political status and to determine all other, even preserving their cultural right.
You're talking about absolute independence for the people involved, but let's specifically talk about the terms of the UK-Mauritius deal, and that paves the way for the return of the islands to Mauritius, which is now free to take back the Chagos Islands, but the US gets to keep Diego Garcia until at least 2036. Is this absolute independence, and what's your view on this arrangement?
That is not independence, because having their military base in an independent, so-called independent territory is against actually the right to self-determination. And that is actually part of the African Charter, where it fought, you know, African country, fought for the liberation of the Africa, including the removal of any military base, because not having, you know, or having military base in another independent, so-called independent, that is not independence, and that should not be happening to another African country. And that is where, for example, more negotiation, diplomacy need to take into place, you know, to ensure that, you know, the people have at least, you know, this freedom, you know, the total and the genuine freedom.
Right. So, Dr. Akosua, you know, if this is a matter of a complete and absolute freedom, but if we look at the Chagos Islands situation, this dispute took over 50 years to resolve. So why do disputes claims you know, over territories such as we have witnessed in the case of the Chagos Islands, why do they take so long to resolve?
So there is a clear resistance in international law and different legal opinions on what constitutes a border or what constitutes a legal and rightfully established administration. The UK claimed it had sovereignty or some kind of rights over these islands. And that was, of course, law is an opinion. It can be manipulated to serve, you know, your purpose. And this is how colonization worked. It was the perpetuation of legal principle to benefit the occupation and to disenfranchise certain populations. And that's why it's in a post-colonial world where we still have dependencies, it's very difficult to really dissolve all of these dependencies. And one of the continuation was the Chagos Islands and the military presence that is even now continuing. As my esteemed colleague said, what is real independence? What does that entail? And what does it mean if a people has the right to self-determination? It means that a people really determines its destiny on its own. However, we live in a world where economic dependencies are real. And as, for example, Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of a free Ghana, stated that a country can be independent formally, however, it can still uphold or still be entangled in some dependencies that are, for example, of an economic nature. So I think we really need to interrogate, what does independence mean of a country in a post-colonial world? We also witness that political pressure sometimes can lead to change and to acknowledgement of past wrongs.
So, Dr. Akosua, then why has the UK agreed to return the islands now, 50 years later?
I think the pressure really grew. I mean, we had decisions after decisions. We have the African Union that even intervened in the proceedings in front of the ICJ. The African Union is very committed to the topic of decolonization, and there was pressure building up. Contracts with regards to the leasing to the US were renewed, but they would now expire. And the question would be, could the UK, internationally be supported in extending it for longer and also remaining the sovereignty or claiming the sovereignty over these islands? And I think it couldn't in the end. And this is where diplomacy can be very useful. And this is an example of it, because international law remains a very limited tool of gaining the real fulfillment of certain principles.
As we wrap up, Dr. Lupuana, can this agreement redress wrongs of the past against Chagossians?
Yes, oh yes. This is actually the way, because the violation of any international right or obligation call for reparation. My colleague has mentioned the issue of Namibia, of Germany. This is actually the wrong done must be repaired or must be redressed. And that is the one of the obligation under international law. Any wrongdoing call for reparation. So here what we are expecting is not only the deal, that is a political deal and all that, but there were many, many other implications, related to the colonization or the oppression of the people. People have lost their life, people have lost whatever they have, and this call for reparation. And that part has always been ignored under international law. And this is where perhaps, not only for a specific country, but, as international aspect, this is where, we have to look at how this can be feasible. So that is feasible, that is the part that is very, to my own opinion, is very important that the reparation be done. And it should be. And the people must call or ask for reparation of the violation of their right. Because here we're talking about the violation of the right. So they must be redressed.
All right, Dr. Akosua, you have the final word.
I do agree what has been said by my colleague, that it is a historic step towards justice and redressing a historic wrong. However, we can criticize this decision and this agreement, which we must, because we must stay vigilant. And of course, the duration to reach such an agreement is part of criticism. And then also the loopholes that clearly have been found and made use of to exclude affected communities and indigenous people and really have them freely determine their destiny and their future. But I do think, nevertheless, this is a right step, a step in the right direction.
All right, Dr. Lupuana and Dr. Anna Akosua, to you both, thank you very much for being a part of this discussion. But that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, Olivier Bancourt, leader and chair of the Chagos Refugee Group, Dr. Kandala Lupuana, international law expert, and Dr. Anna Akosua, lecturer in international law. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X, and you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, bye-bye.